work on the Google Analytics team. I've been with Google almost 7 years. I actually was at a company called Urchin Software, and we got acquired in 2005. And then we launched Google Analytics in November and became one of the most popular products. How many people here use Google Analytics today? All right. We actually don't share numbers of how many people use the product. So I had to go to a third-party site called builtwith.com. They show you different sites and the technology they use. According to them, Google Analytics is on 75% of the top 1,000,000 websites in the world. So you're not alone of the people who are out there. And so for most people, when you start using Google Analytics, you get some JavaScript that you put on the site. And pretty much most people, this is all they do with the product. And we actually see the numbers that a significant amount of people actually don't leverage all the functionality and features that we offer in the product. And that's my goal here today to talk with you guys. I want to talk about 3 different things. The different types of data that we collect and how as developers you can use them. I want to talk about our mobile SDKs and how we can track Android. And I want to talk a little bit about our data export API. So I want to give you a full perspective of all the different tools we give developers to use. So let's look at the different types of data that we collect. So at its central component of analytics, we track how users interact with content. And so we have this real simple model that the whole product is built around. We have visitors who visit a website and interact with pages. The visitor can come back and interact with more pages. These are 3 different levels, and we call them the visitor, session, and hit. And so there's a relationship here between a visitor having multiple sessions and each session having multiple pages. Now, all the data in Google Analytics revolves around this model. And so as I talk about the different types of data we collect, we're going to come back to this model to see how it interacts with that. So the first part we're going to talk about is the visitor part of the model. Now, let's say you're a developer. You just spent all these hours investing in a new product that you just launched. Now what? How many people are using it? Are people actually just installing the app, or are they coming back and engaging with the application? Understanding usage is really important. And so with Google Analytics, we give you a significant amount of data around how many visitors are actively using your product. Here's the visitors overview report. And here we're looking at 3 months of data for a real live application. In these 3 months, this application saw 44 million unique visitors visiting their app. That's a huge number. I actually did a little bit of research here, and I found that this number, I looked at some of the data, and it's, in 2010, I guess the population of Israel was 7.6 million. So in 3 months, this app was used by over 6 times the entire Israeli population. That's staggering. That's the kind of distribution you can get with a web application. So imagine this number. Imagine you're a startup and you're looking for VC funding. This is the type of metric that you have to use to show them why people are actively using your application. So unique visitors is really important. If you look at the data, you see a little spike here. And so this spike, usually we see this happening when people are doing a campaign or they're running promotion, and all of a sudden people are getting data on your site. So understanding when you get spikes of traffic is important. When we first launched the product, it took us a day to process all the data. Then over time, we got it down to an hour. Now for small accounts, we can get it down to about 10 minutes. Within the last couple of months, we launched real-time analytics. You can get your data in Google Analytics in real time. And with this, I want to show you a little demo of how this works. So I'm going to go to, let's see if I can navigate. This might be a little, here we go. Wow. So here's a site. And if I go to home, we go to this new real-time beta. So here we're looking at total number of people who are active on this site right now. So this is the googlestore.com website. And if you have an internet connection, you can go to the site right now, and we'll track you in real time, and you can I'll show you how fast this works. Let me just, it's kind of difficult looking on these 2 screens here. There it is. Great. So if you go to Google Store, what we're showing you is every second we're updating this report with how many visitors are active on the site. And as time goes by, you can see the seconds going across the screen at the bottom. After a minute, you'll see this little number here is increasing over time. And this is the amount of traffic. So high. So here we see a little spike of traffic. And at any given time, we can look into this report, and we can see how many visitors are on our site right now. Here it's increasing. We can also look down at the bottom of the report, and we can see which pages people are viewing, what are the top referrals, what are people engaging on. And we can see where in the world people are coming from. So here we see there's a significant amount of traffic from Tel Aviv. So you guys are definitely clicking on the thing and looking at it right now. So this product here, this real-time reporting, is available free for all our users in analytics. We released it a couple months ago, and it's slowly rolling out to all our accounts. What's amazing with this is that to do this processing, we actually have to process all of all our accounts all the time, so that way when you log into the report, you see the data instantly. So we actually do all this Google processing in memory. There's no disk for real time. So it's a really impressive engineering feat that we could really leverage Google infrastructure to provide this type of reporting. OK, so we looked at the visitor, and we saw why that was important. Let's take a look at the hit. So again, the hit represents the interactions when people are interacting with the content on your site. So how would you use Pageviews, for example, is one of the types of hits that we have. So here's a game that uses Google Analytics. The way the game's laid out is that there's multiple levels. Of course, how many people have played Angry Birds? Right? OK. So you have poached eggs. You have a couple different levels. And so what you might want to understand is how many people actively use or play various levels or different stages within the game. And so the track pageview method is one way that you could send that data to analytics. And the interface looks like this. You call track pageview as the first parameter. And the second parameter, you could pass an optional string. And this string represents a hierarchy of different levels of data. And what we usually like to do tell people is to encode the location of these different data that you're tracking. So in this case, it's the level section of the game. It's under the poached egg directory, and it's level 1. So when you send this, when people get to this level, you use pageview to analytics. Most people look at the standard reporting interface. But what I like to use is custom reports. And in custom reports, I can create what's called a page dimension. And for the metrics, here I use page views, which shows me the total number of interactions. And I also look at unique visitors. So remember, visitors is what we were just looking at in the previous example. So when I run this report, I can see for each level, not only the total number of times people have played the level, I could see the total number of unique visitors on the level. And so what's interesting is when you look at these two metrics, if you divide page views by unique visitors, you get a sort of engagement or frequency type of metric. So if you look at this example here, if you could probably see it better in the front, but the number of page views divided by unique visitors for the first level is almost about the same. So most of the people are playing once or 1.2 times, whereas in level 2, they're playing almost 3 times more. So there's significantly more engagement with the second level. And that's really interesting because people are probably finding it more interesting to play it. They're coming back. And you probably, as a developer, want to go back to that level to figure out what in that part of the game was really exciting to make more of your games have that type of engagement. So we looked at page views. Another way you could send data into analytics is called event tracking. How many people have used events in their product? OK, cool. So events is a different way to send data. It's not a hierarchy. Rather, you pass 3 separate strings. And then what's really nice is you have this numeric value that you can pass. So the first is the category, action, and label, or the names of the strings. And then you have this optional value. So the way I like to tell developers to use this is really leverage the fact that you can pass in a continuous number to the product. So let's go back to Angry Birds. Now we said, OK, level 2 was very exciting, or here's level 4 was really exciting. What we might want to know is how long do people spend playing these different levels, right? And so the way to set that up is pretty easy. We can use a little bit of JavaScript, and we could take a timestamp when people begin the level. We could take a timestamp when people finish the level. We take the delta of the two, multiply it by 1,000, so we get it in seconds. And then usually I tell people to put some sort of bound on that. You know, there's always some clown has their system clock always misset, and they could always set some bad number. So you don't want to do that. So you put a kind of if statement around it So it's within, in this case, an hour of engagement. And then you pass an event to Google Analytics. And so in this case, we're passing an event that says the level, the kind of the area of the game poached eggs, the level 4, that we're tracking time spent, and we actually pass the numeric value. And so here, it's nice about event tracking is when we look in the reports at the bottom, what we see is we see the total number of times people have completed the level. But what we now have is this value. So we get the total amount of seconds people have spent playing with this level. And then we get the average. So at the bottom, we see that level 4, on average, people spend about 30 seconds. And then on level 2, on average, people spend around 60 seconds. So using this number is a really great way to track time. We were working with one advertiser, and the advertiser was actually running videos online, and they were trying to compare metrics between running TV campaigns versus running online video campaigns. And they were using the total number of visitors to measure reach, or their total audience. And they were using time spent using this same type of mechanism to measure time spent with the actual TV. And they found that for the cost per hour, it was significantly cheaper to do these spots online. So again, time is really an important metric. You could use event tracking to track it. In some cases, you might want to get a little bit more granular on the time spent. For example, averages sometimes lie. If there's 5 people playing a level, one person might spend an hour, and all the other 3 people might spend a couple seconds, and it averages out to something in the middle. So you can get more fine-grained reporting by setting up some sort of a bucketing system. In this case, we just compare the different time spent with various buckets, and then in the third string parameter, we pass that bucket as a string, and then when we look at a report, now we could break out the level based on these different buckets. And that's really nice because then we get a better distribution around where people are spending time. What's also nice is we also get the average within each of those buckets, because again, it's just a numeric calculation, and so we could see where our averages lie within the buckets. So it's a different way to use event tracking to get more fine-grained reporting. Okay, social interactions. So we have this crazy guy at Google. His name is Avinash. He does a lot of stuff about Google, web analytics. He has a blog that's pretty popular. In this case, he wrote an article on Data Analysis 101, 7 simple mistakes that limit your salary. So this is probably something that you want to send to your other analysts at their company so they don't limit their salary. And the way you would do that is using different connections. So social sharing and tweeting as well. So with Google Plus and Google Analytics, we did an integration recently. So whenever time you have a Google Plus button on your site, Google Analytics automatically tracks that. So we can tell you how many people have actually engaged with the button and how much time they spent for people who've engaged versus not. But for Twitter and Facebook, we don't have that native integration. So we open up a new tracking method that allows you to pass in that information. And the method's called track social. In the interface, you pass 4 strings. You pass what we call the social source. So this is the network. So this is either like Twitter or Facebook. The social action, so this could be like a like or a tweet. And then you have the social entity. So this is the actual thing you're liking. Typically, it's the page you're on, but you might have a list of links, and it might be one of those links that you're liking. So you pass in that URL, and then you have an additional path that you can pass. So here's a sample integration with Facebook. Facebook has a little API that they expose. You can listen for different events when you like different people. And here's an example of how we're tracking social. So we're passing Facebook as the network, like as the action, and then the URL that we're actually liking. So here's the data from Avinash's website. And if you look down at the bottom, it's kind of funny. You might not be able to see in the back, but of about 120,000 visits, only 104 of them actually engaged with one of those buttons. And the 110,000 of those visits actually didn't engage whatsoever. So, while everybody's saying social, these plus buttons and stuff is really exciting, it's always great to have the numbers to see if it's really working for your website. And so you can actually drill into this number and figure out what are people actually doing more of on a site. Is it Plus, Google Plus? Is it Facebook? Is it Twitter? And in this case, most of the people are using Google Plus One. And what's interesting about, because we're actually passing the entity that people are liking, we actually give you a report that shows you what are the different URLs that people are actually liking the most. So in this case, you see there's a significant amount of social sharing with 2 specific articles on a site. So this is a great way to look at how different content is popular on your site by using these type of social signals. And it's just a new way that we could look at the data. So we talked about tracking page views, we talked about tracking events, we talked about social interaction tracking. Custom variables is a different way to send data into the product. How many people here have used custom variables? Okay, not that many people. So here's our friendly visitor session and hit model again. So custom variables, put simply, is just a way to group these different entities. So for example, maybe you have different levels of registration, and you want to group the different visitors, whether they're bronze, silver, or gold members. Or maybe you have different restricted content, which requires you to log in, and you want to group visits of people who are members who've logged in versus people who have not logged in. Or maybe you have a bunch of content on your site, and you have different authors, and you want to group performance by those different authors and not by the pages that they wrote themselves. Custom variables allows you to do all this grouping at any of these 3 levels. So here's the interface for our custom variables. You call set custom var, which is the actual method, and there's actually 4 parameters. So at any given time, you could send 5 custom variables to Google Analytics. You specify that in the first parameter as a string, and so in this case, we're setting the first custom variable. Then the actual custom variable data itself can be thought of as key value parameters. So in this case, the key is the author, and the value, this is a value that you would typically get from your content management system. So in this case, this is a little PHP example, imagining that this is rendering in PHP, it's somewhere in the template, and there's an author parameter somewhere else. Here, we're just passing the author value into the value part of the custom variable. And finally, you define the scope. And the scope, in this case, could be visitor, session, or hit level. Since this is a page view, which we said was a hit level earlier, here we're saying 3 is a hit level, and now for all the pages, we'll now be able to attribute the author to them. Now, when you set this custom variable, you actually set it in memory. You don't send it to analytics, so you actually have to call track pageview for the data to be sent to analytics. So now this pageview has the information about the author. So to view the actual amount of data, you actually go to a custom report, and the dimensions we use here is the custom variable key1, and then the custom variable value1. And in here, we'll do the same thing that we did with page views in the past. We looked at page views and unique visitors. And now in the report, we can now look at all the data aggregated by the authors and the different type of authors. So what's interesting here is you can see the total amount of pages that people viewed of these different authors, but then you can also see the total number of unique visitors for all those authors' pages. And again, you can divide those 2 numbers to get an engagement metric. So in this case, author 1, Nick, he only had 30,000 unique visitors viewing all his content, but they had about 190,000 page views. So a lot of engagement. Maybe there's a fan club or some sort of loyalty where people are coming back because they really want to see his content. Whereas Bob, the second author, had fewer unique visitors, but significantly lower number of page views, and didn't have that much engagement metrics. So custom variables is a really powerful way that you can send data into the product. So we looked at the different types of data you could send: page views, events, social interactions, and custom variables. Now I want to talk a little bit about how you can actually send data into the product through different mechanisms. So most people think Google Analytics is JavaScript, but we actually have a bunch of different client libraries. We have a non-JavaScript version where you can actually just use images to send data to analytics. We have Android SDK, which is in Java. We have an Objective-C one, which is for the iPhone and iPad. ActionScript 3 for Flash, Flex, and Air. And then C# for Silverlight. So these are all available for you to use today. And what I want to talk a little bit about is how our Java client library works. So how many people do mobile app development? Okay, cool. So analytics gives you a whole bunch of reporting right out of the box. We give you unique visitor counts like we were looking earlier. You can use that same real-time data on your mobile phone as you're tracking it with analytics. We give you page views, events, custom variables. There's a whole set of e-commerce reporting. So if you're doing in-app payments, you can see how much revenue you're making. And then we also integrate really tightly with the Android market. So if you're buying ads to get people to download your app, we can track that all the way through revenue or in-app purchases as well. So using this library is super easy. You just go to our site, code.google.com, mobile analytics, and you have a library there that you just download. You link the library to your application. And then there's two permissions that we need you to set in the Android manifest file. Access to the internet, and then access to the network state. And once you have that, you're ready to start using the product. You're ready to start tracking. So tracking is also pretty easy. You have a Google Analytics tracker object, so you create a variable to store that. And then in your actual activity, in the onCreate method, you get an instance of that tracker. And then you call tracker.startNewSession. And then you pass it this account ID, and you pass it the application context. Now, once you do that, a lot of stuff happens under the hood. If it's a first-time visitor coming to the site, we actually create a new SQLite table, and we create a random ID. And that random ID is used as this unique visitor ID. So when that user comes back to the application, we're able to uniquely track them. So all the unique visitors report and the live real-time data is completely possible using our SDK. And it's important to realize that the actual visitor ID is not personally identifiable. It's not the device ID. The ID lives as long as that SQLite table is in the application, so it's pretty much for the length of the application. It's also not shared across applications, so it's safe. So that's pretty much it. That's how you start a new tracker. Tracking a page view, straightforward. Usually you want to track a page view when your actual activity resumes focus. So we use the onResume method. And so it's simple as calling track page view. All the page views must start with like a /. And generally, we just tell people to use the class name to track the different activities. So that way you remember in the reports what you're actually tracking. Tracking events is just as easy. The canonical, the basic example for event tracking is tracking how many times people click on buttons. And so in this case, what we do is on the listener, we actually, on the on-click event, we just call tracker.trackEvent, and we could pass an activity, the actual action, like delete button, and what we're actually doing, click. So with event tracking, this is the basic way to track events. And again, using the more sophisticated like time tracking that we looked at earlier, you could look at how much time people spend within different parts of your application. Pretty much you could track anything in your application, whatever you need to do. One of the unique situations with mobile phones is that you're not always online. You might lose connectivity. You might be offline for a while and come back online. And the way we solve this is that for all the requests that are sent to analytics, we actually batch them in a SQLite table. And then over a period of time, we'll dispatch all those events as one big bundle to Google Analytics. So that dispatching, there's two ways to make that happen. One of them is in the start new session method. It's an overloaded method. So you can actually pass in an interval of seconds. So in this case, every 20 seconds, we'll send all the data that's been collected on the device. You also have a way to manually dispatch information, so tracker.dispatch. So typically, we recommend people using this auto batching after a period of time, because what happens is we'll batch a bunch of requests, and even if the user is offline, we'll continue batching requests. And when the user comes online, we'll send all those requests to Google Analytics, so we'll still be able to track users when they're not online. The other thing I want to talk about is our integration with the apps marketplace. So imagine you're running ads and you're trying to get people to download your app. Well, the big question is, how effective are those ads? So we've integrated with the apps marketplace to allow you to track all the different referrals that people get sent to the market, which lead to installs. And so to do that, you have to update your Android manifest file. There's two parameters. You set up a receiver to listen for different intents. And the intent that you listen for is something that's sent from the Android market called the install referral intent. So you just add this XML into Android manifest.xml. And once you're doing that, tracking is really easy. For all the ads that point to the Android market, we have a set of different campaign tracking parameters. So these are 5 different variables that are query parameters to the end of the URL that points to the app market. So when these query parameters are present and somebody clicks an ad, they'll take them to the Android market. If they install the app, all these parameters are sent on to the application that's being tracked by Google Analytics, and then that data gets sent to GA. So with this, you can track all the different referrals of how many people came to your app from these different campaigns. And then you can look at different metrics like how much time did they spend on the site, are they returning, how much revenue did they generate, any of the other metrics in GA. Cool. So that's a really high-level overview of our Android SDK. If you guys have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them after we talk here. But I'm sure you have questions, so I'm happy to answer them. So the last thing I want to talk about is our data export API. I'm probably most passionate about this because it gives me full access to access all the data. There's a ton of data in the product, and sometimes the web interface, you just need to have something a little bit more powerful. And the data export API gives you full access to all your data. So we're about to launch a new version in the next coming weeks. So this is the first presentation I've given on the new version. It's built on an entire new Google APIs infrastructure. We're returning all the data in JSON, so we got a compression of about 10 times for the response, which is pretty huge. We have more language support, so we'll have a lot more libraries right out of the box, including PHP, Ruby, Python, Gwt, Android, and JavaScript's coming soon. Our new version 3 is all built on OAuth 2, so it's a lot easier to use if you use OAuth 1. The one big difference is that we actually now are going to require developers to register for a token. So does anybody here use their data export API today? Okay, you're a really advanced user. You're advanced. Okay. So you guys, you're going to be affected by this. This is coming. This is really important. Your apps will break if you don't change them when we launch this. So the token is actually pretty nice. You register through the Google APIs console. So this is, you might have seen this in some of the other presentations. This is a generic console for all applications to now register. You just turn Analytics API on. There's a little switch here, and you get an ID. You put the ID in your application. Now we can know that it's coming from your app. What's really nice is that we now give you traffic reports for your app that you're sending to Analytics, so you can monitor your app usage. If you're distributing an app, maybe you're building apps for other people, or you have a dashboard throughout your organization, you can now monitor your usage through this dashboard, which is really cool. The other thing is a lot of people ask for more quota. And before, we couldn't identify people well, so we couldn't increase quota. Well, now we can. So now we can give you more quota on the API, which is pretty neat. So for the people who haven't used the API, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the interface. Here's the web interface. There's a couple different configurations you do when you query for a report. For example, you specify the profile. You specify the date range. You specify the dimensions and metrics for the report. You have the total number of results that you want to get, and you need the start index. So these are used for pagination through the result set. You also can sort different parameters, you can filter, and then you can apply advanced segments. So just like the UI allows you to configure all these, the API allows you to set all these parameters as well. And when you query our API, you set all these parameters using query parameters. So in this case, the IDS parameter defines the profile ID. The start and end date parameters specifies the date range. There's a dimensions parameter, and what's unique about this is that you can set up to 7 dimensions. So if you ever use custom reports, you can only set 2. If you ever use a standard report, you can only use 2. In fact, the whole product you can use 2, except the API we give you 7. So if you ever need more data, you just use the API. Similarly, with metrics, we allow you to set up to 10 metrics. So you get a huge amount of data through the API. Also, you can set the start index and the max result to up to 10,000. So in the web interface, we only allow you to see up to 500 rows of the time. And so if you have maybe 100,000 keywords that you're trying to analyze, you can only see 500 at a time. And so if you want to see the next 500, you have to go to next, and then you have to go to next, and then you have to go to next, and then you have to go to next. And with the API, we just give you the full 10,000 in one request. And then you can paginate to get through all the results in your result set. So again, it's a huge amount of data. Like the UI, we give you a parameter to do sorting. We also give you parameters to do filtering. And we also give you a parameter to do advanced segmentation. And so how many people use advanced segments in the product? All right, so you'll know what I'm talking about. For the other people, there's a very important feature called advanced segments. We won't go into it today. But in the product, you actually have to configure advanced segment, save it, and apply it to your reports. And you can actually reference some of the segments by an ID in the API. But we also give you the ability to actually just write out the full expression through here. So by saying dynamic : GA transactions revenue is greater than 1,000, we're only looking at this report for all visits that had greater than $1,000 in revenue. And this expressions can be pretty rich. You can use a semicolon to do operators. So you could say where the transaction revenue was greater than 1,000 and where the purchases were made in the United States. And you could even use regular expressions to say in the United States or Canada. So it's very expressive. These advanced segments really allow you to get at different views of the data. I was just talking to one of our partners, and they were trying to get a certain relationship for all the custom variables that they were sending in the product. And what they wanted to do is create an advanced segment for all the values of custom variables. So they had about 400 different custom variable values. So at first I told him, yeah, you have to create an advanced segment. And he said, wow, well, there's 400. I can't do that through the UI. I was like, 400 is easy. Use the API. It's no problem. So that's really where you can automate a huge amount of work by setting these in the segments. OK, so we looked at the query. Let's look at the actual report data. So here's the report. In the report, you see the total number of results that we found. You also see the total data for all those results. And then finally, you have all the different tabular data. So we return all of these. In the new version, it's all returned as a JSON object. And so the first two parameters of the object is the self link. Now, this is the actual query that you used. We just looked at the queries. It's that whole query string. But we know that developers actually sometimes only want to modify one or two values within that query string. So we actually have an object that has all the different parameters broken out in the query object. The profile info has information about the different account, web property, and profile. We tell you whether the data is sampled. We give you the total number of rows. And then we give you the totals for all rows, which you saw in the previous slide. The way we represent data in this new format is pretty different. If we take a look at the product, you could think of this table as having a header, which describes all the data. It has the dimensions. It has the names of the dimensions. And then you have all the rows of the actual data itself. But none of the rows have any of the information about whether it's a dimension or a metric or what type it is. And then that's all broken out by different columns. So this is kind of the new format that we're using for reports. We have information of each columns. So this is an array of objects that has information for each of the different columns that we have. And then we have rows, which is data. So for the column headers, here's an example for the browser dimension. We see what the name is, the column type, and its data type is string. And then for the bottom one, we see the metric is visits. And what that allows us to do is now when we return the data for 2 rows of data, it's as small as this. So by changing the semantics of how we're returning the data, we got 10 times the amount of compression for the amount of data that we're able to send over, which is pretty big. So if this looks really exciting and you're not sure you want to code, we actually have a full-on app gallery that we built. And so you can come in here and you can find tools that leverage our data export API. There's some really nice tools in here. There's one tool, for example, if you use Excel for a lot of your analysis, you can install an actual plugin into Excel that gives you an interface directly to Google Analytics directly from Excel. So it's a really easy way to leverage all the API without doing any coding. There's also different ETL tools that we have and connectors into different BI products as well. So there's a couple resources from our talk today. If you like the development but you don't want to develop, go check out our app gallery. If you want to develop, go look at our documentation. We have a really active developer group. And then to be aware of upcoming changes, check out our Notify group. Cool. So that's the end of my talk. I think we have some extra time here for questions. Yeah.
With the recent change in Google Analytics, we started seeing the fast access mode almost for each query, and we started seeing it with only 1 day of a query.
Right.
Is there any way to bypass this or ask the Google Analytics? We don't mind waiting. We just need the exact info because the fast access mode data is simply irrelevant to us.
Yeah. So so we released the UI. Actually, it doesn't actually affect the fast access mode. So when you sign up for an account, you get what we call a web property. We get a piece of tracking code with an ID. We call that a web property. And for each web property, then you have a bunch of reporting profiles. right? So you have accounts that have a bunch of web properties and a bunch of profiles. And so what we used to do is store data in all the in all the profiles. So when we collected data at the web property, we made a copy of that and stored it at each of the profiles. And so what happened is we made a slight change where instead of actually storing at each of these profiles, we store it now at the web property. And so storing at the web property, we saved maybe 50% storage, but that meant that now all the data was what was collected and wasn't filtered out. So for some accounts, what happened was when we request data from analytics, some people are sending us massive amounts of data, and we're trying to return a query as fast as possible. So in those cases, what we do is we start sampling the data if it's over than 500,000 sessions within the date range. So if you're querying for an ad hoc query and there's over 500,000 sessions within the web property, you'll start seeing the fast access mode. Before it used to be on this profile, and you could use filters to filter it out. Now it's on the web property, so it's appearing more frequently. The best thing to do is either reduce the date range, so you have fewer sessions in the 500,000, or you can enable sampling on the collection side. So in the tracking code, you could sample at a lower rate. So maybe you send half the traffic to analytics, and that way you have fewer amount of sessions you can do it. The fast access mode only affects like ad hoc reports. If you're in the standard reports, not the custom reports, the standard ones, and you don't apply segments, you should still see the full numbers there. Sorry, that was a longer answer than. All right. Yeah.
So I have two questions. The first one is regarding, from marketing perspective. Let's say we drive users from Google AdWords, and then we check for conversions. But let's say a booking window or a conversion window can be 3 months in advance or ahead, something like that. So. Is there a way to track conversions in Google Analytics that happens, like you said, that the first time user gets to a website, then he goes to another website, and then he comes back to you, and then he makes the conversion? Is there a way to track it? Because, right now we are tracking Google AdWords, I think, in the wrong way, like immediate conversion.
Yeah, so... Yes, there is a way to do that. We released a new feature. So there's so many features, I couldn't talk about all of them in the presentation. But there's another feature we called multi-channel funnels. Mm-hmm. And so traditionally in Google Analytics, we look at the last click and attribute that to the conversion. And so what this product called multi-channel funnels allows you to do is show you for 30 days all the different touch points people did that they came to your site, and then what they did when they finally converted. So in the case if a person did a search to come to a website, left, and then a couple of days later came directly to the site and converted, this new report will show you that they searched, and then they came direct, and then they converted. So you get all the paths to conversion. So for these long sales cycle, you get a better sense of what were the different things that influenced them.
So it's just 30 days, that's it?
Right now it's 30 days, but the report's really rich. So not only do you get you came from Google, then Yahoo, then direct, you can also get the actual search terms, or you can group the search terms. So you can say, show me all the branded terms or this category of terms versus this other category. And you can look at all the different paths that people came to the site before they converted.
So how do you track the user? By his IP or?
Right okay. Now we use the visitor ID in Google Analytics. So what we're doing is we're stitching back together this full path for all the people who've converted to create these special reports.
Can I access real-time information through the API?
It's a great feature request. So actually, no, currently you can't. There's a couple of features that the team is looking at. That's one of them. That's the trending one. That's really high. Okay. So we actually, for all our developer stuff, for the tracking code, for the mobile, for management API, for data export API, we have what's called the Analytics Issue Tracker. It's like code.google.com/p/analytics-issues. And so there you can have any feature requests or you report any bugs. So that's a trending one, so I highly recommend you go there and you vote on there so we can get the engineering resources to prioritize it.
Great. One more question. For Android apps, what is the meaning of average time on web page?
Yeah, it means nothing. So I completely recommend you don't use that.
Okay.
And that's kind of why I wanted to present the different way of tracking time. So time on site, time on page works really well for websites, not so well in applications. And so if you really want to get time, you really want to discretely track it by doing the timestamps. Okay. Not kind of, that's what we're doing by looking at time between different pages, but you don't really have all that flexibility. So doing it yourself and just passing that time is what most, at least that's what I recommend all our developers do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
You said that for mobile devices, you batch up in case of being offline.
Yes.
How does that show up in real-time analytics?
In real time, it shows up as like a little spike when they all come back.
Because suddenly you have like 20 requests or something like that.
Right. So back to your question on multi-channel funnels. So, okay, so if we go to standard reporting. And, okay, so if we go into conversions, there's this new report here, have you seen this multi-channel funnel report before? Okay, yeah, I mean, it's like more than you could shake a stick at. It's hard to find anything here. Okay. So let's look at top conversion paths. So this kind of gives you a sense. So what this is saying is here's all the different paths people took before they converted. And so here's the different total number of conversions that you've had, right? And here's the different paths. So in this case, we're saying the top path is people did an organic search, and then they did 2 organic search. I think one is paid and the other one's not paid. Here they did 2 referrals, direct, organic search. There's a couple different path types here. So here's the source and medium path. This one's probably, okay. So here they did 2 different Google organic searches. So most of the time, people click twice on the different thing to do the different conversions. Anyway, you can look through these different reports and get a sense of all the different things that happened before the last click to get better picture, especially for those longer sales cycles. Okay. Yeah.
A question on custom variables for the scenario logged in versus logged out.
Sure.
I think in your example, you showed it that it's implemented on a session level, right?
Yes.
Okay. The following question, what happens if a user comes, I have a guest user coming to the site, views 3 pages, then logs in, views 5 more pages. Then I go to the content report and I segment the report by the custom variable. What happens to the 3 page views that were generated within the session, which was actually a session in which the user logged in, but they were viewed by a non-logged in user?
Right.
And another question, is a way to circumvent this problem by implementing this variable on a page level. I'm asking because in our product we have a page which looks different when a user is logged in and when a user is logged out. So when I make an analysis, I want to know how many times it's been viewed in its logged in version and how many times it's been viewed in its logged out version. So what we did was that we implemented this custom variable on a page level, but I'm not really sure it makes sense.
Yeah. So let me tell you how it works, and then you can figure out how you can use that to best kind of answer the kind of questions that you're asking. So for a session level custom variable, it's the last value that takes precedent for the whole session. So remember we have the model, the visitor, session, and hit. So there's a bunch of hits that belong to a session. You're sending these custom variables at these actual hits, but then they propagate up to the different level.
So then it's the 8 page views logged in.
And then they logged in and you set it, right? So then once they log in, all the page views in the entire session get that value. Okay. And it's the last custom variable that gets the value, the session value for all the page views in the session. So in your case, if you mark the person as not logged in and they go a couple pages, they log in, and then you mark them as logged in, that entire session will look as logged in. And so many times that would make sense, like for analytics, when you actually come to our website, our marketers want to differentiate between you and kind of members, like people who actually have accounts. Mm-hmm. So they use the way that I've discussed. But in your case, maybe you have some more kind of finer grain controls that you want to get reporting on. Right. So if you think about what a custom variable is doing, it's setting a parameter across all the different hits within the session. And so what you could do is you could set a page level custom variable for all the different hits in the session to get the exact same type of reports. Right. And so that might be something where you might set multiple page level variables across 3 pages and then when they're logged in, set a bunch of, a different value for their custom variables.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hello. For Android, you said there is unique, random unique ID. Can I say can I specify the unique ID?
Currently, no. But that's a lot of people have been asking for that. So currently, the actual ID is a special number, and you can't actually override that in any of the client libraries. But being able to override the ID is something we've heard a lot. So feature requests on the issue tracker.
Okay. Thank you.
2 questions. One, in the last Android market release, the referral tracking was broken.
It was broken, yes.
Do you know if it's been fixed?
It's definitely, I think, one of their priorities. I think they were trying to wait for Ice Cream Sandwich to come out, so they're...
So it doesn't currently work,
there's
but
a little,
it should.
Yeah, it's an issue right now.
And second question...
but the presentation was because for the people who haven't used it, so they can start developing, so when it works, they're going to get the good data.
And the second question is, we want to save the user's data, so we try to dispatch events on Android when they have Wi-Fi, and we're willing to wait because we don't care about seeing them real time.
Oh, yeah.
But then they get time-stamped on the dispatch time.
Right.
So is there any way to get them time-stamped on when they were logged?
Yeah, to override the timestamp.
Yeah, instead of the dispatch time.
That's a really tricky problem. So we're looking at ways to create a window, and we're experimenting with maybe there's a window which you could dispatch events in, maybe a couple hours. The challenge is that once the data, not for real time, but for like the standard reports, once the data gets collected, it goes through a bunch of processing pipeline. And to get data to go to kind of, after a period of time, it gets stored in certain tables. And to go back and update those tables is something the product doesn't do. It's actually pretty expensive because the actual infrastructure to actually save this data is replicated across multiple data centers and so forth. So it's a harder thing. We'll probably have like a window like I think 4 hours is something that we're looking at right now. So if you can set it within 4 hours that we can go back and backfill, and then that, we'll try to make that longer and longer. But there's probably a period of time like you can't send it for the previous day that just doesn't work right now.
Thanks.
Yeah, so it's something we're looking at. Issue tracker in the mobile feature.